I have great faith in this young generation. Take it from the millennials to the Gen Z to whatever's below the Gen Z, the Gen X. And I think people are always surprised by that when I say that, because there's this narrative out there that, the millennials are these, soft little entitled snowflakes. It's a great generation of young men and women. And I'm with, one of the funnest things I do is teach at the LBJ school, because I generally have 22, 25 of these young men and women in my class. I learn from them every single class. People always ask me about leadership. Every time I go in, I learn something new. I learn something new about leadership. But I also learn that they are just as patriotic, just as committed, just as hardworking as their parents and grandparents before them. We just don't give them enough credit for that. I started to tell you the story, but I held off on it earlier today. When I was the chancellor, I finished up my time as chancellor. I'm getting ready to leave. I'm moving out of the Bauer house, which is where the chancellor lives. And we're packing up boxes. And in this box, I find a letter. And it's a letter from my mother, who died back in 1986. But I look at the date on the letter, and it is the date that I went off to SEAL training. It's August 1977. And I realized that she wrote this letter the day that she dropped me off at my aunt's house, because she wanted to drive me to SEAL training. I said, "Mother, you're not going to drive me to SEAL training." So she drove me to my aunt's house in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I convinced her to stay there, and then I continued on. But she had written this letter when she was at Scottsdale. And now I'm seeing it for the first time. Again, she died in 1986. And of course, I see the letter, it's got her handwriting, and no kidding, and I think my sisters are here in the audience, I could still smell the scent of kind of cold cream and whatever women used back then. And so I'm opening this letter, and I'm getting kind of emotional. I'm like, oh my God, I opened the letter, and my mother would always start the letter, "Dearest Bill." She had beautiful cursive writing. "Dearest Bill, you're heading off to," she didn't know what SEALs were, but you're heading off to this training. I'm thinking, my mother thought the world of me. She knew I was just the most competent, most capable young man in the world. And she starts off and she says, I really worry about you. I don't know that you're tough enough for this military training. So I'm reading this. She goes, this is, I think her words were, "This is harsh military training, and you've lived a country club life." We lived on a 9-hole municipal golf course. Actually, we didn't live on the golf course, but we were close to it, right? But somehow we live the country club life. And so as I'm reading this, I'm going on, what? And then I get to the punchline. She goes, "And oh, by the way, you're spoiled," underlined. I'm like, what? I thought my mother thought I was the toughest, most competent, capable guy, and she thought I was a little snowflake. Because she and my father and a lot of folks were part of the greatest generation. And to those men and women that served in World War II and Korea and Vietnam, those of us in the 70s, we were soft, little, like I said, little snowflakes. And thank God I didn't read that letter before I went to SEAL training. So I'm not sure I would have made it through. But what it did was it reinforced with me the fact that every generation thinks the next generation isn't good enough because they didn't walk 3 miles in the snow to get to school or whatever. Well, I'm telling you, this generation is absolutely good enough to get us out of whatever problems we're in. And I think they will. And so I always remain optimistic. You have to. And all you got to do, back to why was I able to lead so well? I said I was inspired by the soldiers. Same reason I've got, faith that we'll be fine, because I'm inspired by the young folks that I meet at LBJ school. I'm inspired by the kids I meet, whenever I'm traveling.